A very warm welcome to those of you that have already joined. Just whilst we're waiting to make a start, we would love it if you would be able to share your name, your location, and the strength that you used most during COVID. So at the bottom of your screen, you will see a chat box if you hover on the toolbar, and feel free to type in there. We'd love to learn a bit more about you. Trudy, what's been the strength that you've used most during COVID?
Yeah, I'm just popping that in actually. There we go. So for me, that's my top one anyway. So as soon as we've been knee deep in COVID, and for ourselves and for others, it's thinking, how can you support others to really sort of learn from it, embrace it, cope with it, be resilient around it, and whether that's your personal family or of course those that we work with within Capfinity.
Yeah, it's really, really inspiring. We have Denise from Chiltern, who's in Liverpool. Welcome, Denise. Bounce back. I can absolutely imagine how valuable that has been, particularly during this period. So thank you for sharing.
Denise, it might be one that needs a rest in a couple of months' time, though.
Absolutely. We've got Lauren from London. A warm welcome to you, Lauren. Gratitude is the strength that Lauren's used the most during COVID. I would really resonate with that. I think it's been an amazing time for self-reflection as well, hasn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's helped with just, bringing everything back into context. Whilst it may not be perfect, it's all right.
Yeah, very, very nicely put. We've got Nikki from Adelaide in South Australia. Welcome. Resilience is the strength that Nikki's used the most. Really similar to bounce back. It's definitely been really critical during this time.
I wonder whether they will be the strengths that we will reveal, that the nation, the world has used more.
We have Alison from Lincolnshire, and acceptance has been a strength that Alison has used. Again, really profound, I think, and certainly relates to a lot of the experiences and trends that we've seen as well.
It's interesting, Rena, isn't it, how acceptance potentially not initially, but when I wonder that kicked in, at what point in the journey, I mean, who ever thought 4 or 5 months ago we would still be talking about it and working from home and the dilemmas that we are in.
Yeah, absolutely. So we have Sarah from Malaysia, adaptability at work and life. I totally understand that. I think that's been really critical with juggling so many different things with all of the change that we've been through as well. We have Melody from Australia as well. Love of learning, especially in pivoting to digital. Really nicely put there. It's definitely been a steep learning curve for many of us, and such a drive in terms of how the focus has been on digital as well. So really relevant. We have Joanna from Portugal in Lisbon, resilience and personal responsibility. What a powerful combination that is. Trudy, what would you say about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So we've got the resilience on one hand, very much being able to cope with what life is throwing at you, Joanna, right now. And then, of course, personal responsibility that then takes charge of that, sort of supports people, takes ownership of people, your teams, those around you. So yeah, absolutely, great combination. But again, maybe ones that, are on, really ones we're drawing on and calling on right now, but potentially ones to watch. I guess the question might be, Joanna, in a coaching is is this sustainable in 6 months' time? And maybe you'll be drawing on some different ones.
We have Michael Baker from Cardiff. Warm welcome to you, Michael. Humour and zest. I can really feel the energy there in terms of that combination. Larissa from France, a warm welcome. Adaptability and creativity. It sounds like there's been a lot of exploration there in terms of that. So thank you for sharing. We've got Joseph from London. Compassion and helping others through furlough. Really profound, and I think the spirit of service, you know, during this period has been really inspirational too.
Rena, I'm going to pause for a moment because I've just spotted Mark in Kenilworth. What a small world. So far we've got Singapore, Malaysia, Alex is smiling. We've got all around the world. Mark, I live in Kenilworth, so a very particular warm welcome. You're probably in a bedroom up the road from me, somewhere near Tesco Express or something. What a small world. But he's using innovation to find a way to deal with the changes. And again, another common one as we pivot to this new world of working here. Great to meet you all.
There's definitely themes coming through just in this chat, which is really interesting. Resilience has come up quite a few times. Love of learning new skills, innovation and finding ways to deal with changes. Creativity has come up with Erin from Australia, Miriam in Bristol. A warm welcome to all of you. And curiosity, Daria from Auckland in New Zealand. I've been using my curiosity to seek out opportunities for the challenges. I can definitely see your optimism also shining through there and how you've really used that as an opportunity, Daria. We have Philip from Australia and being adaptable for both myself and my team. Keisha from Cambridge, perseverance. That's been really critical, I would say, during this time. Thank you for sharing your reflections in terms of your own strengths. We're actually going to make a start now and delve into this topic in more detail. So a very warm welcome to all of you to this seminal webinar on how the world's strengths changed during COVID. I'm Rena Jumnadas and I'm a managing consultant as part of the development solutions team at Capfinity. And as someone that's been a part of Capfinity since our inception back in 2006 and witnessed our strengths journey, I'm personally excited about this session in terms of sharing how strengths have evolved during these unprecedented times. Today we have our panel, Dr. Alex Linley, founder and CEO of Capfinity. We have Trudy Bateman, head of Strengths Profile, and also Lauren Scarlett, Strengths Profile consultant. And I'll hand over to each of them to introduce themselves before we start. So Alex, if I could invite you to start first.
Thank you, Irina, and a very good morning, good afternoon and good evening to all of you, and thank you for joining us for today's webinar. Very much looking forward to the discussion that we're going to have and the thoughts that we're going to share with you, so thank you for joining.
Trudy, if you'd like to go next.
Yeah, of course. So I've seen many familiar names on the webinar list. So many of you will know me as the lead in the tool that you probably are already using and coaching with. And again, like Rena, I've been on the journey with Capfinity for many years now. And as the head of Strengths Profile, I guess the most exciting part of today is that I'm not knee deep in Excel spreadsheets and algorithms, churning away the data that I have been for the last couple of months, but I'm so excited to be sharing it with you today.
Thank you, Trudy. And Lauren.
Awesome. Welcome, everybody. And it's a pleasure to be here with you celebrating and sharing the data. I'm Lauren, as Rena said. I'm the consultant for Strengths Profile, and I'm seeing again familiar names and correspondences that we've had. So it's great that we can interact on the data today. And if you have any questions throughout today's webinar, please do drop them through to me and I'll be thrilled to help you with them.
Thank you, Lauren. So to share more about what we'll actually be focusing on in this session, there's 5 main areas. So we'll start with exploring the strengths data and the most common strengths and weaknesses globally that have emerged before COVID-19. We'll then look at strengths in crisis and what the global changes have been in terms of the extent to which we've used our strengths during the pandemic. Our focus will then turn to looking at growth and impact. So whether you're an individual or as part of an organisation or career service, we'll explore how you can apply this knowledge to support recovery and growth. And then we'll come on to looking at well-being, where we'll share our analysis of current levels of well-being and happiness based on our data before looking at next steps in terms of our future research. As Lauren said, throughout the session, we'd really welcome your questions in the Q&A box, which you'll find at the bottom of your screen. If you hover on the toolbar, there are 2 speech marks as an icon. So feel free to post your questions in there throughout the session and we'll look at those towards the end. So to start with, I'm delighted to hand over to Alex, who will introduce how strengths are uniquely characterised by Capfinity.
Thank you, Rena, and delighted to join you all this morning. It feels like many years back now. I'm trying to think, it was probably in 2008, 2009 or something that we started to think about how we could define strengths and what it was that was different about strengths. And ultimately, as many of you will be familiar with, we ultimately landed on these 3 different characteristics of a strength. So it is most often recognized that a strength is something that you are good at. So performance obviously had to be a key element of that. But I often at conferences would ask the question of what is a strength, and people would put their hands up and someone would always say, oh, it's something that you're good at. And I would take great pleasure in saying half a point for that answer. Because the thing that we are often missing is that a strength as defined by Capfinity is not just something that you're good at, but also something that you enjoy and are energized by. And so energy as that second component of a strength is absolutely critical in terms of the results that we see and how strengths are used in practice by people every day around the world. Now, I say used in practice because, of course, you can be good at something, you can enjoy doing it, you can be energized by it. None of that matters if you're not actually using it. And so use is the critical 3rd dimension of what defines a strength. And so over the course of time, we developed this 3-dimensional tripartite model for strengths that is now the core of the strengths profile tool. What that then gives us is the ability to think about strengths in terms of the 4 different quadrants of realized strengths, unrealized strengths, learned behaviors, and weaknesses. And these quadrants, as many of you I'm sure will be familiar, come about as a result of the combination of each of those dimensions of performance, energy, and use. And so depending on how an attribute is characterized across performance, energy, and use would determine where it falls into one of these quadrants. And something else that is specific to this strengths profile model is that we very much see it as a dynamic model. We recognize that strengths could evolve and change over time. Now, I'm always careful to say that we can't just choose the strengths that we want. It's not as malleable as that, even though we might hope it would be. But definitely we can think of strengths as being in the foreground or receding from the back into the background as our circumstances and context change. And that's something that we'll certainly talk about in today's session, is how globally our circumstances and context changed and what that meant for some of the different patterns that we saw in relation to strengths. But in terms of the evidence that what happens when we use our strengths, we can see and have seen for a decade or more across individuals, across career services, across employers, and strengths at work, a whole range of different things that are achieved as great outcomes. I'm always careful to say that strengths aren't a panacea. They won't solve every problem in the world. Strengths are not a vaccine for COVID. But what we could say is that if you use your strengths, you are likely to be less stressed. You're likely to be more resilient, achieve your goals better, be more engaged with a career service if you're at a university or similar. And particularly at work, where a lot of the Capfinity focus is, we've seen things like people being far more likely to stay in a role and perform well in that role if they have strengths that match the role. Then we've seen things like customers being a lot more delighted with the service they receive when people have been recruited for those strengths. So across a range of areas, we see evidence for strengths and the benefits that using our strengths can deliver for us as individuals, for us as parts of teams or thinking about our careers, and particularly for us in our working lives as well.
Thank you, Alex. And we are going to draw on Alex's expertise a little later on in the webinar, looking at well-being. As many of you will probably know, a huge area of expertise for him. So I'm just looking at the chat again and thinking how I can weave some of these themes in, and I probably don't need to, because it's great that some of the themes that are already coming through from you all, and thank you for your contributions already. So still popping up there, Sarah from the Midlands, strength, motives, optimism, and looking at those and thinking actually various stages to the piece that I'm going to share with you now, and that's one is the data. So it's always important to understand the data, and please be as excited as I was as we've number crunched our way through this, and then of course we have to make it practical. So whether you're an individual just getting some support for your own strengths here and on a journey, whether you're a manager, whether you're a co-worker, a team leader, a parent, a friend, it's really important that we kind of use today's data and think about understanding it and then how we can practically move on from that. So I thought I'd take us back a step to do that. So we can't really look at today's strengths, so I would call them right now sort of the COVID sort of prevalent strengths, if we don't know what the strengths were originally. So I want to share a little bit of 2019 data with you, if I may. But before that, I'm going to do a little bit of interaction. So you'll probably find that over the next 20 minutes or so, I will ask you to appear in chat as well. So we keep Q&A for anything that's sort of question and answer, obviously, for our Lauren, who's ready and waiting for your questions. But chat is typically something I love to use that's a little bit more informal, and for you to share with me your strengths and thoughts on the data that I'm sharing as well. So, but before we get into chat, I've got a little poll for you, and I'm going to see what you think. So we're talking 2019 here, data from around 60,000 people. What you think is the most common realised strengths across the ones I'm now displaying on your screen for you. Someone was right in there quickly with humour. It'd probably be one of mine, I have to say. That's great. Another few seconds. Really interesting. Okay, I'm going to end the polling and share the results with you. So you'll see Resolver as came out one of the key strengths that were most common strengths just before COVID. And actually it's a really good guess because it is right up there, but as always that would have been too easy for you. And it's actually humility. So humility was the top strength last year. So yeah, we'll come on to kind of whether that's the same, but I'm just going to, in terms of the poll, you usually have to just exit out of it. So if it's still on your screen, and annoyingly so in a moment or two, please just cross the X there just to move it. So what does the rest of that quadrant look like in 2019 then? So some of you are obviously practitioners. I recognise a lot of names, and it's great to have you with us. This data has changed a little since we may have launched it in 2018, but not a lot, I have to say. So the interesting thing here is when we last did this data in 2018, pride was the top realised strength. Pride is now number 2. But I have to say it's pretty neck and neck on these two. They fight every time for that top pole position, and you're talking sort of 0.something% in it. But let me just explain the data here, because there's two types of data that I'm going to introduce to you. So by the end of this, you'll know we love data. This is the most common data. So in here, you've got the most common 7 realized strengths, 7 unrealized strengths, 4 learned behaviors, and 3 weaknesses in the world. Across the 60 strengths. So the most common, so humility came up around nearly 60, just over 61% of people's profile. It was in 61% of people's realized strengths across the world. So that's this data, it's the most common, but we've dug a bit deeper. So I just want to explain, and that's the advice that we'll also talk about as well in terms of the biggest differences, but this is the quadrant. So again, many of you will be practitioners as well and recognize some of these old favorites are still in there year on year. So work ethic, we know as a top learned behavior. Would you believe around 70% of people have work ethic in their learned behaviors? And when I'm training and teaching and coaching, as I say, some of you will know, I kind of think it's quite a healthy place for it to be honest. So it means that you do work really hard and you're really good at work, but you know, over time, it can be a bit draining. There is a world out there other than work. So if that's you, I just thought I'd pick that one out because it's probably my most common question is, I've got work ethic as a learned behavior. What does that mean? Does it mean I'm lazy? And of course it not. It means you now join 70% of people in the world as having it as a learned behavior. So this is where we were, as I say, at the back end of last year. And these are really sort of some strengths that we see when we run this data every year, pretty consistent most years as well. These are pretty sort of old favourites here in terms of what we get drained at, what we're not so good at, but of course, more importantly, what we love to do and what we're really good at as well. So for those of you that know our strengths families model, the 60 strengths fall into 5 different families. And it's really interesting to sort of see some of the patterns that are coming through here in terms of the 3 of the realized strengths are from our being family, so our values being really important to us as a global pattern here. So that's our 2019, and I said now I'm sort of having talked about that, we're going to talk about some of those changes. As I say, for any Q&A on data, please don't keep Laura on board. I'd love you just to sort of occupy her for the next half an hour. If there's anything at all on the tool or the data, she is there to support you. So as I say, sort of looking at 2020 now and just explaining how that data was taken. So many of you will know, and I should probably say a really big thank you. We've already been on a couple of webinars with some of the Strengths Together campaigns, but we ran a strengths profile for free, offered it for free during the month of April. The introductory profile for anyone that could take it. So, and you guys I know were absolutely brilliant to see, to share in your networks. So we were really thrilled to have a huge number of people taking strengths profile in April. So this data comes from April. And I guess thinking about April, certainly my own experience was April was pretty scary and pretty chaotic. It's sort of starting to, people are in what we call the new normal now, but April wasn't like that, not like that for many. We were thrown into technology, thrown into a health scare, potentially thrown into new ways of working, homeschooling, whoever thought that. So you know, I guess think about going back to that time frame in April, because you know, heading early August now, quite a bit of time has lapsed. So, but again, many sectors, many countries, a really wide range of people that we looked at, and then this is the data then that looked at, so that revealed. So I'm going to look at the 2020 now. So here we are, and maybe your first initial reaction, like mine, was that actually there weren't as many changes initially as you might think. So the blue denotes changes. So in the 2020 here, you still see it's humility and pride. I do have to say humility did sort of sneak away from pride more so in 2020. So humility did become more important than pride, but it still sits there in that position. So again, sort of celebrating people, acknowledging people and sharing each other has become really important to us. So the blue denotes changes. So gratitude and service were not in that previous quadrant, and I will come on to the sort of what's gone to. And I guess that was a really warming initial reaction that I had. And some of you have shared gratitude, which has been brilliant. And Alex wrote a lovely article called sort of talking about the great pause and gratitude and thinking about perspective. So, and most of you or many of you have been on that increased journey with gratitude. And service also came up. Now, this wasn't a huge leap, but it did come up. And in my experience of 10 years on the tool, service can often be something that we overplay as well. So it was important that we didn't see that in a really big leap, but you're using it more steadily to support those around you. So the rest were fairly consistent in the realized strengths, but what I am going to do is share the biggest changes across all 60 with you. But remember, this is just the top 7, and year after year this data is pretty consistent, I have to say, in terms of what we can lead on, what we lead on globally. Now, there are very much changes within maybe countries and gender, which we'll be releasing shortly, but as a global nation, this is the data that's come through. So if we look at learned behaviours, then I'm going to follow the model in all of this advice in terms of the quadrant model that you all know so well. So realised strengths, learned behaviours, weaknesses and unrealised strengths. So learned behaviours, again, I've talked a little bit around that work ethic. I thought adventure was really interesting though. So we are getting a little bit more drained by this nature of being or not being able to maybe have all the resources, or being able to sort of pivot. I mean, many of you saying actually you've really enjoyed it, or that's the strength that you've been using a lot of. But I guess it's one to watch potentially, as we are showing signs that it's a little bit draining. The weaknesses, again, no change there, but these are pretty significant weaknesses globally. So these come up time and time again and are pretty high, consistent to the others. So time optimizer is around sort of 35%. Of people often will have time optimizer as a weakness, so that's hard to beat, that one, I have to say. And then unrealized strengths, again, a change around the change agent. So remember, these are unrealized, so those who are a little less familiar with the model, unrealized strengths being something that you're good at but you're not optimizing, you're using less. So but we've got some excitement around change going on. Maybe we don't quite know yet what to do with it, but there is excitement around what this looks like. And remember, this is April data, so by now many of you are probably, or I've seen in the chat, using your creativity and innovation and have started those plans for change. But right now, it's really important that I guess that change has been recognised, that it's coming, and we're quite a little bit excited about what we could do with it. So Angela is saying, I don't feel so bad not having time optimizer weakness. You are absolutely in good company, and I was going to share this a little bit later on, Angela, but I'm saying, if you take nothing away from this data today, time optimizer is the biggest theme. Whether it's high or low for you, that is time optimizer is the one piece to take away. So if I've given you too much data and you can't remember it all, that's the one to take away. So thank you for sharing that with me. So then I'm just going to share with you the 2019 and cross-reference that in terms of what that meant in terms of what disappeared, I guess. So we've got our good old Resolver, so that came out top in the poll. So the 2019 on the right here on the blue screen shows Resolver in blue, so, and Moral Compass. They're the ones that have changed. So Moral Compass and Resolver have slipped slightly. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about Resolver in some of the more practical application. But again, Moral Compass didn't slip too far down, but it has slipped in to make way for gratitude and service. And then going back down, learned behaviours, then again, I'm going to come on to adherence, but adherence came into learned behaviours as a rise. So something that we were doing more of. And in actual fact, there's a positive story around adherence that I'm looking forward to sharing. It was one for Alex and I when we went, oh, adherence, no, wow, where did that come from? And weaknesses we've talked about, again, no changes there, but these are pretty consistent weaknesses for us globally. And I think even just knowing that as a coach, as a career service, as an individual, Angela, thank you for sharing again, it's really important. I'm not alone. If I'm feeling I'm not as confident as others around me, do you know what, there's an awful lot of people out there that do. So even just knowing this data, I think as an individual who looks after each other is really important to take away, and think how you can maybe sort of mentor and coach others around some of this data. And I've mentioned our time optimizer. It snuck away from the unrealized strengths. I'll leave it to you to guess where it went, but remember, it's the theme of the day. So that's the quadrant data, and what I want to do is share with you then sort of the biggest changes. So, and when I talk, what's the difference between a biggest change versus the quadrant data? Again, this is the most frequent common data. You might find none of yours sit in here if you've got the introductory profile. So actually, where did we see the biggest leaps and changes? And then what does that mean for you practically? Because for me, who's built my whole career on practical application around strengths, that's the bit that I really want you to take away, is what can we do about this? So the biggest changes globally on the realized strengths in. So again, ignoring quadrant, these have the biggest climb. So these are the things that we are now doing more than we were doing in 2019. So growth was the #1. Now, so many people have shared that already, and it was really warming to see. So growth was the #1 climber in terms of we now have more of these as realized strengths than before. And it was something, of course, that it makes sense, doesn't it? We're all having to pivot, change, learn, be creative, be innovative, and with that we are learning new skills. So in this slide, I'm just going to look at the data, and then the following slide I'm going to give a little bit more practical advice for you to look at. These slides are available, so there's quite a bit on here. So for those of you with data are like, yes, I'm on it. Those of you who want a bit more practical application, the slides are available to take away. So on the arrows down here then on the right hand side where the resolvers at the top, these are the realized strengths that have slipped from us a little bit. So the resolver was the, again, these are in order. So resolver was the one that we've slipped the most in terms of having this as a realized strength in our quadrants here. So, and again, I guess when we start to think about resolver, it's a problem we can't solve on our own. So it's a bigger problem than we're used to. There are too many problems coming at us left, right and centre, that, you know, whether it's personal or work or, you know, neighbours and community and health, there was just too much there. So pride, you know, quality, service, all those sort of the service of quality being slightly slipping. So these are the ones that, you know, and I guess for me here, when I saw the theme, it felt like a little bit like we were saying here, that what slipped was how to get things done. You know, not really sure what to work on and how to work on it, and in what order to do it. So there was definitely a theme here around getting stuff done for me, and whether that's still the case, I would imagine there's still quite a bit of theme going on there. So, and also if you look on the left hand side, now, excuse me if I'm going way over your sort of knowledge of strengths profile, but we do have families, as I've mentioned. We have being, thinking, motivating, communicating and relating. So the 60 strengths are combined. Now on the left hand side of the, what you can see here, growth, adherence, incubator down to mission, all of those were either being, which we sum up as like our values, or thinking. So there was a huge increase in sort of how we were thinking about what we were doing, whether that was resolving or detail or following rules and so forth, or it was about our values. So these were the biggest climbers. We were like, what do we do? And actually listen to my heart here. So I thought that was a really interesting theme as well that came through. On the other side again, slightly less of a theme, but I just thought this was quite a big theme coming through in terms of how we were doing it, and maybe what we were doing being really important to us. So then the sort of the practical takeaways, and I won't read through them all, but you know, for you to take away, and I guess it's quite relevant to yourself and your own strengths here and some of the stories you potentially already shared with us. But growth and self-awareness, you know, it's really important that we're growing and learning and being aware, and making that practical. So you know, most of us have had a lifelong lesson in Teams and Zooms, which is very practical, but making sure that we're continually growing and learning and being aware and celebrating and resting them. You know, we're not on full throttle on those, but just making sure that they're really grounded and we keep learning and keep improving improving on some of those so that they become even better as strengths. But probably the piece around growth is making sure you're growing and learning, particularly now things potentially have certainly slowed down, or you've got the right equipment maybe, and you've got the right sort of IT knowledge now, is to really think about what's next on that growth path. So one of Alex's top strength, incubator, and one I complimentary partner with him in many meetings that we have, where he listens to my ideas and then ponders. It's really important that you have bubbles like that, because for somebody like myself who's quite action orientated, but as a nation we've come through and we've said, you know what, we're doing more thinking now, and I think that's linked to this pause, this reflection, this what's important to us and perspective that we've come through, but also to get things right. It's very sensitive to get things right for everybody that we're working with. We've got to be able to see the bigger picture of whatever we can. We also know that it's quite difficult to see the bigger picture right now. So more thinking going on, more reading probably around what we know or what we're reading, what others know, so we can make decisions. But you know, again, innovation coming through, but innovation is a real lead from incubators. They're allowing time for incubator. Will help that creativity and innovation that we've seen come through so much in the chat. And gratitude, we've talked about this, but that pause. And for me, when I'm sort of talking to others practically around this, I think pick two things that have been really important that you've done over the last few months and stay with those in terms of what's as a priority of things that you want to do differently. So it will be sad if we all go back to the way that life was completely, and the lessons that we've learned, and you know, what is it that's been important to you and your family or your colleagues, and how will you continue to do that more regularly? So maybe that's sort of just a piece how to make that more practical. Personal responsibility, so that's fallen a little bit as we saw, but again I think that's around for myself and what I've seen, it's what you can be responsible for, delegating, focusing on what you can control in the short term, and making sure if you're working with others as well, that they have what they need, and obviously people need much regular check-ins. And drive, again, that makes sense to me, and one of the things that we've done at Capfinity is continually refocus, whether it's the individual goals, the team goals, or the Capfinity goals, that we're looking at what we know and what we can focus on, so that we're really being very proactive in what we're doing. So people with drive have to have things to do, and have to have quite a lot of things to do, and want to move forward quite quickly. So if you don't optimize that, they could move forward on the wrong things. So it's really important, again, if you're coaching, to support people around, you know, what is it that they can achieve today or the week, and move from there. So again, questions, please fire them away at us. I can see Q&A going, and don't leave Lauren time for a cup of tea. Keep going with the questions. Thank you. We're going to move on to learned behaviours now, but I'm just pausing if you just sort of quickly look at the screen before we do so. And again, if there's anything on chat. I'm going to, when it comes to learned behaviours, I'm also going to ask you to interact with me as well. Okay, so let's look at the learned behaviours then. So when we talk about learned behaviours on the increase here, okay, this is when it gets a little bit slightly more negative, I guess, in that an increase in learned behaviours is probably not quite so great, because what we're saying is we are more drained now by these activities. So a lot of these weren't a surprise, and they link to the realised strengths. We've seen resolver slip, we've seen pride slip, we've seen judgment slip. So in terms of realised strengths, so that makes sense that actually they've gone into our learned behaviours. So, but again, one to watch. We are struggling a bit more with problem solving, so solve the problems that we can, come together, those sorts of things that we'll be addressing here. And one of my highlights outside of Time Optimizer taken away was our lovely adherence. So again, I've seen many practitioners. My experience of adherence is huge in that over the 10 years, most people have adherence in the bottom half of their quadrant. We do not like rules. Doesn't mean we break them, we just don't particularly like them. And so seeing that here in terms of it was lower in the learned behaviours, so this means that they are less adherence, self-awareness, right on detail in our learned behaviour, so we are less drained by these things, was phenomenal for me, who's been training and teaching. Everybody hates adherence, you know, you're not on your own. Suddenly we've got an increase in adherence, and I guess it makes sense, of course, in terms of we have had to follow rules for our health, for our safety, for our survival. So I wonder whether we will, you know, it will be a continuation. You know, again, that's what we've had to do. But what's been great is that we've actually looked like on some parts, or some of us have enjoyed it more than others. So the key learnings then, some of these I mentioned, you know, making sure if there is a problem, that you're coming together in terms of, and that is going to be more difficult as we are virtual and working in different scenarios, but communicating and collaborating continually being really important. When it comes to pride, you know, it's difficult in terms of the remote working, maybe focusing on things that are really critical here, giving examples. And judgment is around, you know, being able to make quick snap decisions. So what resources do you have available to you? What can you go and get that's going to help you make that judgment? So it becomes a little bit more energizing and less draining. But you know, we are having to make decisions and quite quickly around how we work, you know, how we school and so forth. So I guess that's also could be the amount of decisions that we're having to make, and change decisions as well. And then again, when I mentioned here resilience, so again, remember, learned behaviours going down is a good thing, because these have now fallen more into our realised strengths. So as I mentioned, we're finally enjoying to be a little bit more adherence, it's you know, but it's keeping us safe. So really important, but potentially one to watch, because I still don't think it's a natural way for us to be. So and I get moving on to a completely different field here, but you know, I guess whether it's lockdown, whether it's schooling, it's, you know, these rules could potentially be slipping based on the fact that we know it's not as natural. And I would say that for detail as well, that often that is a top learned behaviour, and we've had to be more detailed now, and actually for the majority of us we are moving in that direction of enjoying it, but probably as a coach, as a manager, it's leading, it's thinking about how it's not maybe not so sustainable. Detail's great for the right people, and Lizzie, who's on our call as well, she has a top strength of detail. She QAs everything for me, and that's our partnership, and it works really well. So it's great to have people on your side around detail. So yeah, amusing to think adherence isn't natural. Certainly from my experience, we follow rules. We might build furniture in flat pack, but we don't like it, we don't enjoy it, and we probably throw the piece of paper away in some kind of sort of temper tantrum halfway through it, and the screws are all missing. So yeah, I think you can absolutely have also, Emma, in terms of adherence, too much of a good thing as well, because I think that with all strengths, you know, we haven't touched on this yet, but can be overplayed. So, and whether that's, you know, during COVID or before, strengths can be overplayed. That's why we call them use them wisely. So you're absolutely right there. So let's move on to weaknesses, and I'm probably not going to dwell too much on these, but optimizer. So again, we're flipping it again here. The arrow up is typically where we've had increases. So we've got we've got less weaknesses here. So optimizer, action, persistence, enabler. With increase. The arrow up says we had more of these, so that's a negative again. So actually, time optimizer is the theme, remember that one. Action, persistence, enabler. And again, some of these make sense. We haven't been able to have access to these. You know, we are remote working. How are we enabling? So some of these being really important to take away. So these are becoming a little bit more frequent weaknesses for us than perhaps they were before. And then on the plus side, the arrow down, just to confuse you, if in the UK it's still early, maybe you have not had enough coffee. For Australia, you might have a glass of wine in your hand. But these are the things that are on the decrease, and we've talked about most of these already in terms of gratitude, growth, mission. I'll come on to an incubator where we have less weaknesses in these at the moment. So what that means is most of these are sort of going into maybe unrealized or realized strengths, and we've got more energy and passion around these. And then practically then what that might look like, the takeaways, again, as an individual, coach, whatever area you're working in, remember that the time optimized, I just can't emphasize, it just kept coming through in the data. We were really struggling with how we spend our time. So, and that as a parent, as a manager, as a coach, that's critical for everybody. It's relevant for everybody. So the bit that we can help everybody with here is about being really clear on what's available, timelines, projects, strengths working, making sure people are working on the things that lend themselves to their strengths. Looking at barriers around action. Again, the link is here: getting going, moving, getting things done. And enabler. It's been pretty difficult to do that in the way that we've been working, but as we potentially some of us are moving back into the workplace, what can we be doing, or is it more something that we need to be aware of online? Strength spotting is certainly a great way to be recognising and supporting, encouraging others. And there's also lots of huge opportunities that we've seen from you already around some of the innovation and creativity that you've seen as opportunity for new skills. So the bit I just wanted to draw attention to on mission was just, we are more purposeful right now. So redefining and prioritising has been important to us to aid this recovery. So, if you're working in that space, what does that look like? Maybe we don't know what that looks like in the short term. Maybe it's something that we're working on in the longer term that you can support people with. But maybe daily missions are important in terms of how we're operating and the things that we're achieving. So we can keep that momentum going around mission. So one last quadrant, but there wasn't as much of a shift here around the unrealized strengths. Remember, these are the things that you are good at, but you have the opportunity potentially to do less, or using them less. So on the increase here then, so we had more unrealized strengths. So this is more, I really want to get involved in this and do this, but I'm not quite sure how. So if that's you, again, your job as a coach, manager, individual or self-coach is saying, how do I create those opportunities to find opportunities to be doing these more? And then the things that we were doing less of in terms of where our energy was, certainly, it's good old time optimizer. I did warn you. Gratitude, growth, self-belief and counterpoint, all being things that slipped a bit, and that's mostly what I could see here from the data around opportunities being available to us. So as I say, unrealized strengths, less movement here about what we were potentially excited about but not doing. So writer came through as something that we were sort of parking a bit more so, and I guess that makes sense as we're all jumping on Zooms left, right and centre. We've talked a little bit around change agent, but again it's this clarity. Again, that's a huge theme that's coming out here of direction. And equality was a really great one to see. So we're really wanting to sort of connect with different people, making sure we've all got what we need in these challenging times. And then finally here for me is self-belief. So this one for me as a coach, time and time again, is a weakness, and it really upsets me. It's here all the time because the people that I work with are amazing, and every day we lack confidence in how good we really are. And for me, strengths is always the way forward on this. In terms of self-belief, using your strengths is a self-fulfilling prophecy. We use it more, we do more, we perform better, we are more engaged, and we get recognition for that, and we do it more, and we get more sort of performance out of it. So that can be a real support for people around this, and also counterpoint. So I guess that makes sense from the types of meetings that we're having potentially as well. Being the opportunity to be sat in a virtual meeting, to be constantly giving your opinion, might be something that is has lacked during this time. So that's we will go on to some Q&A shortly. That's it for me on the quadrants. What I would just love just to end with very briefly on chat, if you wouldn't mind, is an unreal, just a positive to end my section on, is within your own unrealized strengths, what are you most excited potentially about using over the next couple of months? So what sits, if you've got a profile, if not, and you're starting to see the language, just use the language that you've seen. What are you most excited potentially about using? Self-belief, thank you, Very, there. Yeah, and it's a really popular one. I love to think about just when you see an unrealized strength of self-belief, pick it up and take it in your back pocket. It's quite a hard one to develop, but now you've got it, and wear it. Whatever that looks like, wear it. Change agent, compassion. Yep, compassion definitely saw a rise, but it wasn't as significant as some of the ones I'm sharing with you here today. Creativity, action. Oh yeah, more self-belief. We've come this far, guys. We can get to the rest of this journey. Time to think. So yeah, Julian, that incubator was coming through thick and fast. So these are all things that in your toolkit, whether you've taken the profile or not. Thank you, Nikki, for your incubator. It's, you know, it sounds like we've still got some more thinking to do. We've got some more reflecting to do, more perspective to gain as we go forward. So thank you so much for sharing. I will hand you over to Alex, and if there's anything within chat still coming through, Alex, do feel free to comment, and I will see you shortly for the Q&A.
Thank you, Trudy. And moving back to the data, one of the things that we wanted to share with you was some snapshot of the changes that we've seen in terms of happiness, engagement, and strengths overall. So as part of Strengths Profile, as many of you will probably remember, we just asked some very, very simple single item questions about happiness, about engagement, and about strengths use generally, as well as having all of the richer Strengths Profile data. So one of the things that we did as part of this analysis was to see if we could track any changes in these measures in this April 2020 COVID data. And what we found was actually quite surprising. So the changes for happiness, we saw a 3% decrease. So I say quite surprising because that's probably a lot less of a decrease than we might have anticipated given everything that was going on in the world. And we would hope that some of that was mitigated by the different strengths that people were using. For strengths use, recognizing that people were in very, very different situations in many cases, we saw again a relatively small decrease in strengths use, and that could be a reflection of needing to lean into these different areas of learned behaviors or even weaknesses, as we've seen as we've gone through the detail, because our context and the requirements around us shifted so much. And then in engagement, again, a surprising finding in some ways, that only a relatively small decline, 2.5% decrease in engagement at work, despite the fact that in many countries of the world at this point, people were either not working or working from home or grappling with very, very different situations and scenarios. So one of the things that we were really interested to see is not only the change in the patterns of strengths, but actually these relatively small decreases in happiness, in strengths use, and in engagement. And we can only speculate as to whether those decreases are relatively small because of the population, because it was a strengths profile population, and therefore maybe people were more resilient and more buffered because they were more focused on using their strengths. But what we will look at over time is how does this compare with sort of broader national or global data, and is there something that is indicative of more resilience and more ability to cope with this population, who are probably more focused on using their strengths to help get through things. So some really intriguing findings there. And then in terms of the numbers of strengths that we have, you can see that before COVID, typically we were split fairly evenly between strengths and learned behaviours, a relatively low number of weaknesses, and a few more unrealised strengths. And that would be the typical picture across things that we would see for people. What do we see now in COVID or after COVID? Not a vast change. So again, one of the things that's really notable here is probably the absence of a significant change, because if you think about just how much everything changed in what we had, what we've experienced over recent months, would it be the case that we would have expected relatively little change in the strengths that people are reporting? So a small drop in the number of realised strengths that people are coming down with. Learned behaviour is saying the same. A tiny increase in weaknesses and a tiny increase in unrealised strengths as well. So reflective of potentially some of the adaptations that we're all needing to make and leaning into different requirements and different areas where we're needing to do things that possibly we haven't done before. And I think a really interesting explanatory perspective on this is the point that Trudy made earlier about where we had seen the declines in the realised strengths was really about people feeling in control, knowing what to do, being able to make decisions. And I think that's a really noteworthy finding, that across the pattern overall, we can see the evidence of people struggling to know what to do and grappling with how do they go forward, make the right decisions, do the right things. And I think this is also reflected in the data that we see here. We'll of course be tracking all of this over time, and there's also a lot more that we will be able to share in due course as well, as I'll now hand back to Trudy to take forward and tell you about.
Thanks, Alex. And there's already a couple of chat questions. Thank you, Katie and team and Sue on actually what this data is going to look like potentially a few months here. So as you said, this is our adrenaline data, if you like, kicking in, and then what does that might look like in a few months is something that we're absolutely really intrigued at and we'll be sharing with you as well. So thank you for that. We are going to pop to Q&A very shortly. I've just got a couple of slides to share with you just before that, and then we've got some Q&A time. So those of you that know me, and I know many of you do, I don't leave a webinar with telling you this. So whatever the webinar is about, and of course strengths being the key thing, I'm always telling you that strengths is a journey for life. It's not a one-time moment on a profile or one-time conversation with a coach. It's a moment in time that you complete the assessment and maybe again, but it's something that changes your life, and it's something that you keep with you for life. So just remember to keep revisiting what you might do with it for yourself or for your team, or as a leader, and really kind of pushing through strengths. And what we are seeing at the moment, is something that we're going to focus on a bit more in September, is does seem to be a little bit of a drop in sort of the team focus, and we are going to do our bit to support that. So until that time, you know, people have been very much focused on getting through it. But remember, with all of this development of new strengths, you know, what does that look like, and how can we do that even more? So always remember, my slide I share with you, it's strengths is a journey for life. You get out what you put in. So keep revisiting your strengths and what you're going to be doing with it going forward. Many resources on the SP website, Strengths Profile website. In terms of books, we've got a model here called the Best Self Site, which looks at your self-aware strengths, explore, launch and flourish, and takes you through a whole process of videos and worksheets. So again, some free resources there if you're wanting to do more for yourself in terms of develop your strengths. And then next steps on what we've done here. So Alex and I will be looking at gender, age and countries. We have all of that data. As you can imagine, many slides we've already shared with you, that would have been too much today. So we will be writing LinkedIn articles, and if you're not signed up to us, either follow myself on LinkedIn These slides will come out and it'll have my LinkedIn details on it, and as the SP LinkedIn details as well. But it will, and also sign up to the Strengths Profile newsletter as well, where you'll get notification of new blogs revealing what the differences look like across some of the other sectors that we've narrowed in on. So this was the global data, and we're really looking forward to sharing the next step with you as well. There's also a forthcoming webinar next week, more ways to strengths coach. And again, if you're interested, we will. I've just been asked to, if Lauren, you can paste the link into the chat box, Sarah, we can absolutely do that. It will also come out on your newsletter feed. Lizzie's already got that ready for you guys, giving you the slides. We'll pop this in there as well in terms of the webinar sign up.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Alex and Trudy, for sharing these very thought-provoking insights. We've had some brilliant questions that have come through the chat box throughout the session that Lauren has been responding to. And there's a few more here that we'll come on to shortly. If any of you have any further questions or reflections, please do continue posting. To come on to some of those questions now, if I could direct the first one to you, Alex. So we have a question from Sherry Clark. In terms of adherence, is there something about chaotic crisis situations and human nature? We hate uncertainty and want to understand and have control. Rules and regulations are easy to understand in uncertain times. What would be your perspective on that, Alex?
I think it's a great question, Sherry. Thank you. And I would agree with you. I think if certainly in the UK, if we think back to the initial government advice in lockdown, which was very specific, very clear, actually incredibly controlling and authoritarian, we knew what to do. And so it was relatively easy for the vast amount of the population to be adherent to that and to respond to that with a sense of maybe relief is the wrong word, but relief that somebody else had made a decision. We didn't need to think about it. We just needed to follow along. And if we contrast that, and I found this quite fascinating from a psychological perspective, if we contrast that with the revised guidance from a month, 6 weeks ago, which was stay alert and control the virus, and it was a lot more ambiguous because probably it needed to be, because we're moving into a different phase, but that actually required people to think a bit more and to make their own decisions. And there was a bit of a backlash when this messaging came out to say it's not clear, we don't know what to do, we need to be told precisely where we should go and what we should do. And I remember thinking at the time that there was a risk, and I think this risk is still there, that we could have developed a sense of almost learned helplessness, that if you don't tell us precisely what to do, we've forgotten how to take responsibility and act and decide and move forward for ourselves. So I think that is very true, and I think that's one of the reasons we've seen some of the changes in adherence that we have. Thank you. Great question.
Thanks, Alex. Really insightful. The next question is from Samira Hassan. So Trudy, if I could direct this to you, and it's in terms of the data more specifically, is the comparison month on month, i.e. from April 2019 versus April 2020, or a comparison by year?
It's more of a comparison by year, but that was probably a coincidence. So we last took the 2019 data in July 2019 because we do it yearly. And then the big number crunching around that was done in 2019. And of course, April was because we wanted to get onto the COVID research as quickly as possible. So we typically do it year on year in the summer. But as I say, it was important to get this data as quickly as we could. So thank you, good question.
Thank you. And again, Trudy, this question has come up throughout the session, but how often would we expect strengths profile to change and shift, considering, you know, the trends that we've seen?
Yeah, so it's something that we talk about an awful lot, and when I train on this, I share, just to sort of make it a bit more visual, I share my own profile over a period of 12 years. And during that time, just to make it a bit more practical, of my top 7 realised strengths, 4 remain consistent in those 12 years. They're the ones that, my key strengths, if you like, the ones that I'm always using, I'm always energised by, and I'm doing really well in. So, you know, there's always going to be those that have a consistency across your lifespan. But we would expect profiles and strengths within the quadrants to change over time based on your circumstances. So whether it's because you're new to the world of work, whether it's because you've got job changes, you're doing different things, you're working in different ways, we would expect there to be changes, but they wouldn't be typically all that significant, so they would make sense to you over time as well. So just to give an example, I guess, you know, would you have a strategic, aware, you know, 16-year-old? Potentially not, but that doesn't mean that that's not a natural strength. It hasn't kicked in yet, so it might be lying dormant in an unrealised strength. And because of our model as well, where we measure performance, use and energy, just one of those needs to change for it to go into a different quadrant. So if you think about work ethic, nothing changed there, we're still good at work, but how our energy sits around it might change, and then that will put it into potentially a different quadrant. So performance is often a lot more stable, and use then will fluctuate depending on our context and situation, as would energy. So we recommend generally about every 12 months or so, just to sort of keep checking, keep developing, taking those unrealised strengths into realised strengths, and keeping an eye on those learned behaviours as well.
Fabulous, thank you. We have a question from Melinda Dixon. How do we shape a new culture where some people will want to work at home while others won't, as an example of some of the changes? Should we be looking at putting more emphasis on growth and resilience? Trudy, if I could come to you first of all on that.
Yeah, I mean, obviously every organisation is grappling with different things right now in terms of the culture that it's working towards. I think what we're seeing here currently in terms of the data is there is an emphasis on growth. People are naturally leading themselves towards that because they've had to. There was no choice. We all had to learn new different things. I mean, right now we haven't seen a huge increase in resilience as was bounce back. We've had some great chat where people are using it, but it hasn't been something that we've seen that's on that real significant rise. So I think it's something that's always great to have in terms of being in an organisation where we just don't know what's around the corner. I know that's something, Alex, that you've talked quite a lot to us about at Capfinity, about preparing for the unknown. If there's anything you want to share there.
Yeah, thank you, Trudy, and I think a really pertinent question, because we, I suspect, are in the similar situation as so many organisations, and as the question alludes to, and I think this is going to be a very, very real topic, and I really struggle to believe that there will be a return to the old way of doing things, where most people were in the office most of the time. I do think there is likely to be a real shift to the office becoming more of a hub where people convene for particular reasons, but the rest of the time they may work from home. Now, of course, this is predicated on the assumption that it's possible to do that. There are some roles where that isn't the case, and so you would need to be either office or location based. But I think what that means in relation to strengths is it highlights even more the importance of paying attention to the different strengths that people have and how those strengths could play out in different situations. So for some people, they could be really inspired and interested by that different way of working. It could suit them very well. for other people that may be more of a challenge. So there could be a real opportunity to think about different types of complementary strengths partnerships and strengths-based team working to explicitly take advantage of this new context that we're all going to find ourselves in.
Fabulous. Thank you both for your insights on that. So sadly, we've reached the end of our time together, and if you have any further questions, then please do feel free to contact us at the email address that you see at the bottom of the screen there, so inquiries@strengthsprofile.com. Thank you very much to all of you for your participation in this session. We hope that you found it interesting and insightful. And we look forward to welcoming you to the next webinar as Trudy mentioned, so we'll circulate a link to that for those of you that would like to register. We wish you every success as you go forward and very much look forward to being in touch again soon. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Have a great week.